It's a little bit surreal just in terms of thinking, so this is the next big step. This is the rest of my life.
For Justin McCurry, that giant step was quitting his engineering job in 2013 and retiring at age 33.
I really focused on how can I change my lifestyle for the better so that I can have more free time for me.
He's not alone. The desire to quit working decades early is the focus of a growing movement, mostly among millennials, called FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. How did he do it?
Saving a large percentage of my income was a big part of it. We saved about half of our incomes, and that increased as we made more money.
Living and working in Raleigh, North Carolina, McCurry and his wife never made more than $150,000 a year combined. After 10 years of saving and maxing out their 401ks, their investments, mostly in stock index funds, grew to $1.3 million. Will that be enough for him, his wife, and 3 kids?
You always have those doubts. Am I doing the right thing? Is this what I should be doing?
6 years later, the McCurrys say they live on just $40,000 a year, taken from his investments, and a blog he writes on the FIRE movement called Root of Good. Tanja Hester is part of the FIRE movement. She was a communications consultant until she quit working last year at the age of 38. Her husband retired at the same time at the age of 41. She writes about it in her new book that's called Work Optional: Retire Early, the Non-Penny Pinching Way. And Tanja, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why did you get into this movement? Why did you want to quit working while you were still in your 30s?
My husband and I had jobs that we loved, actually. I think there's a common misconception that those of us pursuing early retirement are doing it because we hate work or we feel like we shouldn't have to work. That really couldn't have been farther from the truth for us. It was just that we felt the toll that work was taking, and we knew we couldn't sustain that pace until age 65. We were both working in consulting careers that demanded long hours and a lot of travel, and they just really took a toll. At the same time, I also knew that I might have a genetic disability in my future and not have an endless timeline to kind of do the things that I love to do, which were very active and outdoorsy. So for us, it was a pretty easy decision once we realized that early retirement was possible. But, you know, that's going to look a little bit different for everyone.
You know, we call it early retirement, but you're writing a book, and we just heard from another gentleman who's still doing things too. He's writing a blog. Is it actually retirement, or is it just stepping down from an incredibly chaotic, hard-paced job into one that maybe you can take your time with a little more?
I do think it's easy to get caught up in the traditional retirement kind of definition, thinking that it has to mean that you either work or you don't. I think there's so much more gray area, and that each of us really can define for ourselves how much of a role we want work to play in our lives. And the book really helps people make that decision in a really intentional way, whether that's full early retirement or something in which you work some, or like I do, which is I do a lot of stuff that looks like work, but it's all projects that I feel passionate about that I do only for me and not for anyone else.
Do you think the heart of the FIRE movement is really about being frugal, cutting your spending, not acquiring stuff, or is it more living off stocks and investments after you have saved a big nest egg?
I think it looks different for everyone, you know, like any group of people, you've got a wide range of folks in the FIRE movement. Mark and I are much less frugal, and that's why non-penny pinching is in the title of the book, because we're actually not naturally frugal. We weren't natural super savers, and I wanted to show folks that even if you don't love counting every cent you spend on your groceries, you can still pursue early retirement or some form of it.
I know I'm going to sound like an old fuddy-duddy when I bring this up, but it's just the idea of what might happen down the road, whether it's a divorce, whether it's an accident, whether it's an illness that comes up and big medical costs that are associated with that. I mean, that's the thing that always panics me from the thought of doing something like this. How do you tackle that, and what do you advise people?
I think that sometimes working gives us a false sense of security and tells us that we can spend all of our money when in fact we should be saving a lot of it. Knowing that your career is only going to go for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, something shorter than the norm, I do think motivates you to save more and to make some different decisions that do help insulate you against those things. You might get divorced, and maybe a couple saved an amount that was good as a couple, but it's no longer enough if you have to split it in half. Or healthcare costs are rising every year. That's something that we need to account for. There are a lot of things that I think you can be very clear-eyed about. It's just a matter of acknowledging those risks and not assuming like, oh, we'll just adapt as they come.
Let me ask one more issue. Do you think it's any coincidence that this movement has come at the same time that we've seen a 10-year incredible rally in the stock market? I mean, if something happened like the Great Recession from just over 10 years ago, if we saw markets collapse again, would these people still be in a decent place to survive a market downturn with the plans that they've laid out?
You know, obviously, the historically long bull market has helped a lot of people reach early retirement faster. I think that's just indisputable. But I don't think that it's a phenomenon that exists only because of that. I think that you see a lot of different movements of people right now questioning the norms that we've been taught, questioning the consumerist things that we've been taught as a society. You have the minimalism movement, the tiny house movement, you know, all these different ways that people are saying, you know what, the story I've been told, maybe I don't want to follow that. So I think that early retirement, to me, is more lumped in with that, of people finding alternative narratives for their life and saying, you know, just because my parents or grandparents did it this way doesn't mean that I have to.